and yelled at Tom Payne, and Coach Rupp was infuriated.
We bonded that game because they were unmerciful on him. You know, they spit on us coming out the tunnel.
That's what I've been understanding about life, that sometimes when you're put in a position, you have to have the wherewithal to go through the process, you see. And if you understand that, you're better able to. Jackie Robinson understood it. Tom Payne didn't understand it. I just felt that I was being rejected on some level, and it hurt, and I wasn't strong enough to deal with it.
Today, Payne says he harbors no ill will at anyone who hurled insults, and he has a profound admiration for his coach.
I love Adolph Rupp because of one thing. Adolph Rupp put me out on that court when the time came. And if you go back and look at the newspapers, a lot of people, I don't think necessarily wanted me to go out on that court at the time.
There was an enormous amount of pressure put on him by some of the local bigots not to play Tom Payne.
Vaughn said prior to Payne's first varsity game with the Wildcats playing at Northwestern, some of Rupp's friends and confidants tried to talk the coach out of starting the 7-foot sophomore in favor of an all-white starting five.
And Joe Hall and I stayed up and we talked about it. Finally, Joe went to bed. I don't guess I went to bed till 4 o'clock in the morning. And but I knew Coach Rupp was going to do what was right, and he did what was right. He played Tom Payne. He started Tom Payne.
Adolph Rupp showed some kind of courage. And I just love Adolph Rupp right now, where I'm at now. And I'm not saying that in any kind of ways, because when I see pictures of me sitting beside him on the bench, it makes me feel good.
The Wildcats prospered during their first and what turned out to be their only season with Tom Payne, winning 22 games in the SEC championship. After that 1 year, Payne, who already was a husband and a father, declared hardship and signed with the NBA's Atlanta Hawks.
When Tom Payne went pro after sophomore year, that hurt Adolph, because he said that there goes my chance for another national championship. So he was thinking not of what color that player is, can he play?
At that time, I didn't really understand what I was doing. I didn't understand who I was in Kentucky history. And had I understand who I was, and like I understand now, I would have stayed and I would have kept continuing to play and battle it out, you know.
He would spend just one season in the NBA. This is Tom Payne's world today, the Green River Correctional Complex in Central City, Kentucky. After his rookie season, he was arrested and jailed on a rape charge. He was paroled in the early 80s and moved to California, where Payne was arrested and convicted of rape again. After serving 14 years, he was returned to Kentucky and sentenced to another 15 years for violating his parole. When he talks about his college career, Payne still calls the Wildcats "we." In fact, he says, being a part of Kentucky's storied basketball tradition helped get him through some tough times during his incarceration.
I've been at the verge of almost wanting to take my own life. I've been so emotionally distraught and despondent to the point of where I used to go in my cell and cry every night. Because of the whole thing. My mom was hurt, my children growing up without a daddy, not representing my state like I'm supposed to, the opportunities that I let go. It's very painful. And one of the ways I've made it is because I bonded with that.
With the Wildcats?
Yeah.
You still find pride in that?
Yeah.
He's had a lot of time to think about UK basketball, his place in history, and his coach.
I'm going to hold Coach Rupp. I'm going to hold Kentucky in esteem, and because I had an opportunity there. I did something historic there. It's a legacy for my grandson.
Adolph Rupp relinquished his job after the 1971-72 season, forced to step down at age 70 by the school's mandatory retirement policy. He died 5 years later, but his persona gradually would take on new life as the relevance of the Kentucky-Texas Western game grew with each passing decade.
we were not aware of any of the revisionist history until 1991, the 25th anniversary of this particular game. And it caught us totally by surprise because they were manufacturing a story that didn't exist.
1991 is when Sports Illustrated published a story marking the 25th anniversary of the 1966 NCAA championship game matching Rupp's runs with Texas Western. The article, written by Curry Kirkpatrick, more than implied that Rupp had played the race card with his team in the hours leading up to tip-off. Wrote Kirkpatrick, Rupp usually was a charming PR rogue, brimming with diplomacy and psychology. Regrettably, his politics leaned more toward the KKK. To a man, Rupp's players deny it ever happened. Texas Western coach Don Haskins has admitted to telling his players he knew Rupp had made condescending racial comments to his team prior to the game. Haskins since has distanced himself from those remarks, but burnished by time, it has become fact in the minds of many.
Everything I've ever read about Adolph Rupp seemed to have been written by people who had no idea who Adolph Rupp was, who could never have been around him, never spent an hour talking to him, but are dealing with the parody, dealing with the caricature. They're dealing with a cardboard cutout of who they think Adolph Rupp was. Rupp has been transformed into a symbol of racism that he never was. All of a sudden, this is such an easy story. It really is a story in black and white in the minds of people who weren't there. That becomes such an easy story to portray, to dramatize. The facts tend to muddy that because there was a lot of gray.
I was there 4 years. I never ever got any hint at all from him that he was that. One thing coaches can't do is they can't lie to players. Players know coaches.
They didn't know him. And a lot of people that talk about him and write about him, they weren't born when he was alive.
I don't think that the people that are revisiting the world back then had any knowledge about what college sports was about or the world was about at that time. So I think he's an easy target. He's not here to defend himself, and many of his peers are gone.
As college basketball grew in popularity, Rupp's reputation as a villain grew with it. In his book, Rupp as I Knew Him, former assistant Harry Lancaster claimed Rupp used a racial slur in complaining that University President John Oswald wanted the basketball program integrated. It was a remembrance that didn't add up, given the fact that Rupp had backed previous President Frank Dickey's move to integrate the entire Southeastern Conference in the late 50s. Seth Davis of Sports Illustrated wrote, Adolph Rupp was the game's George Wallace when it came to integrating black players. For most of his career, Rupp fought tooth and nail against the inclusion of blacks into the game. Said Rick Cantu of the New York Times, Adolph Rupp once declared he would never let a black player wear Kentucky blue. There were more as writers began to quote each other. It was torture for Rupp's family members, who at one point considered legal action, only to find you cannot defame the dead.
You have stories written by sports writers who were not alive in those days. You're written by people who didn't know my father, who didn't live in the South, who didn't understand any of the situation. They just pick up a idea and run with it.
That's just not right, and it's unfair. The man doesn't have a chance to make a retort. He is, and the family really doesn't have a chance to make a retort. And that's really not fair to a fellow that certainly doesn't deserve that, and a family that doesn't deserve that, and a university that doesn't deserve that.
I don't understand how they can pick this thing up and run with it when there is absolutely not one iota of truth in it from a standpoint of actions or words by my father to give any legitimacy to this.
I know his son has carried that stigma along with him.
Jim Tucker, the Paris, Kentucky native, who landed a college scholarship on Rupp's recommendation in 1950.
I had an opportunity to call him to tell him the same story that I just told you about what his father did for me, and he said that has done him a world of good because no one had ever said anything of a positive nature about his father, and he was so happy that I would come forward and say something about Mr. Rupp.
In the book Let Me Tell You a Story, written by John Feinstein, legendary Celtics coach Red Auerbach tells of their friendship and dismisses the notion that Rupp was a segregationist. He said, "All I ever hear from people is that he was a racist. You know what? He did hate black guys who couldn't play. He also hated white guys who couldn't play, blue guys who couldn't play, and green guys who couldn't play, and Muslims who couldn't play. That was it. All these people who never met the guy said he was a racist. I knew the guy."
When I used to draft and did most of the scouting, in fact all the scouting, I never went to a draft meeting without calling him up. And we go for an hour or so on the telephone. Who do you like and why? I always used to try to draft as many boys as I could from Kentucky.
Auerbach said that he didn't care, Adolph didn't care if they were red, if they were green, if they were yellow, if they were black, if they were white. He just wanted basketball players that could win. You know, and I truly believe that.
Had Rupp moved more quickly to desegregate his team, as former UK President John Oswald urged, perhaps he could have avoided much of the criticism leveled at him before, and especially after, he died.
As I look back on it, we probably could have made a stronger effort to recruit black players back then. Certainly, we were in the forefront, and should have been. I mean, we were the best college basketball team in the country. We were the best college program in the country. And if there was anybody who was going to take a leadership position, it would have been the University of Kentucky and Coach Rupp. But you know, when you look back on it, I mean, he was successful. I mean, he was winning games. He was winning 20 or more every year. He just didn't want to change a whole lot.
Well, there ought to have been some things that were in place to sort of raise the eyebrow of a parent or an athlete. Say, well, you know, I see some changes, but, you know, there was no evidence that there was change taking place here. You know, not only on the basketball court, but elsewhere. We couldn't see change. And so, you know, if you don't see it anywhere else, well, why can I expect it, you know, in Memorial Coliseum?
Some of those who actually lived and worked through the troubled decade of the 60s have a different perspective of the time and the man.
Actually experiencing the culture and the society the way it was, not the way that it ought to be or the way somebody thinks it might have been, but the way it was. And certainly he was a product of his time.
If Coach Rupp was a racist, and I don't know whether he was or not, I don't know what was in Coach Rupp's heart. All I know are the facts. My personal experiences, things I've read, things I witnessed, things I know. And that, to me, is the only fair way to deal with the situation.
The greatest failure in all of this stuff is to try to apply today's standards to another era. You know, if you're talking about a difference of 40 years, if you're talking about a whole generation, I don't think you can say that the way the world is today is the way it should have been 40 years ago. Maybe we all should have been Martin Luther King, but there was only one of him.
He was so big that it was left to him to be the person to segregate the South in intercollegiate sports, or be the person to go out and recruit, you know, the first black player. And he tried to do those things.
I believe his hands were tied. He wanted to win. And I believe if he could have put a monkey in a suit to win a ball game, he would have done that. But he wanted to win. And still there are people who believe that he was a bigot. I don't think so.
Neil Reed, the ex-Kentucky assistant who spearheaded the recruitment of black players in the early 60s, visited Rupp in the final stages of the coach's life.
He said we were selfish. He said he and I were selfish. We wanted it for the social advancement. And we were selfish in that we were willing to put Wesley, just as the 3 kids in Philadelphia that were bulldozed over, we were willing to put Wesley's life on the line for us to be successful in integration.
He didn't care. He just wanted to win games. He would win games however he could win games. That's why I'm still waiting for somebody to show me that he turned his back on a black player who would have helped him win games.
People who didn't know him went through the myth and the legend and all the rumors more than anything else, and did not go directly to people who knew Adolph, because if you talk to those people that were close to him,